everyone, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook group, and our newsletter, and our great sponsors, Abitativa Casa, Phil Italy, and Italy Rooting. And my guest today is historian and author, Sal Perricone. So welcome, Sal. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. So I want to talk certainly about the book and the history of the Italian community in New Orleans. But before we do that, when did your family arrive to the United States?
My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, arrived here in the 1880s. My grandfather arrived here in 1902, and she was already here. And they met when my grandfather Francisco came to New Orleans from Palermo.
So they came pretty early. They came before the big rush, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, there was the big rush started probably in mid 1870s, the latter part of 1870s, and continued on well into the teens, 1920s. But they were already here. She was already here. She was from San Yusuf Sclafani, which is not far from Bissachino, where my grandfather was in the Palermo province. And but they didn't know each other until he got here. And so they met and got married. It's a good question. What I know about him is that his family had a vineyard in Bissachino, and they lost it, and for various reasons. I kind of outlined a little bit in the beginning of the book, but when he came to New Orleans, he was just a fruit peddler. He saved, knowing the Italian frugality, he saved enough to have his own grocery store. And New Orleans was pocked with all these Italian grocery stores, and there's still some existing yet today, despite Walmarts and supermarkets and that sort of thing. There's still a few today. But back then, Bob, New Orleans had a network of Italian grocery stores, and he had one right outside the French border. And of course, the Depression, he gave a lot of people credit. And when the Depression hit, nobody could pay, and he lost the business, and went back to push their fruit cart in the French border, and did so until he died in 1941. Until he couldn't work anymore, but he died in 1941.
Wow, that's something. I think on my dad's family, although I don't know for sure, my grandfather and his uncle had an embroidery shop in Manhattan, and they didn't lose that during the Depression, but I think they lost their house in New Jersey, and then that's when they wound up in Queens. But I guess that was common for a lot of people, especially, I guess, the Italians trusted each other, and then, like you said, they would give them credit.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a book and a credit book, and he serviced the Italian community and the small Black community in and around where his grocery store was, and a Jewish community as well. So today, the very intersection where the grocery store was is now the emergency room at level 1 trauma center of New Orleans, the hospital. And my son, ironically, is a doctor, and he did his rotation in that emergency room. I had to tell him exactly one night where he was standing, and an irony that he's working in an emergency room where his great grandfather had a grocery store.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Sense of history for him.
That's pretty amazing. But stranger things have happened, I suppose. Oh, so that was your great grandfather. That was your grandfather. So what did your grandfather do then?
No, but it was my grandfather. It was his great
His
grandfather.
great grandfather. Okay,
You know,
I got you now.
Francisco was my grandfather, and his wife, what name was is Mary, was Mary, and um, like I said, they were married here in New Orleans. I got his immigration uh, recordation from the custom house, and it's indicated he came here in October of our month, 1902.
Wow.
He registered his intent. Back then, the immigrants used to register their intent to become a citizen, and 5 years later they would become citizens. It's different today, but they were brought here on a ship, like many of them were in New Orleans, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. But they were brought here, as I outline in the book, pursuant to the laws of Louisiana, which created its own Bureau of Immigration, which was created in 1869, I'm sorry, 1869 to help find replacement workers after the Civil War during Reconstruction, because after the liberation of the slaves, and a lot of them moved north, they left a lot of the agriculture fields fallow. There was no workers, and the city needed workers, and um, and that's when they went to southern Italy, Croatia, Greece, to get workers. Of course, Sicily was in distress at that time, and Louisiana, as well as other states, exploited that distress and brought those immigrants over from southern Italy, from Naples down to Sicily and Sardinia. Who's we got a lot of you heard of Ustica, huh? The island off of Palermo. We
Oh
have a
yes, yeah, yeah. That's
Ustica. We have a lot of Ustica people from whose ancestors are from Ustica, and so we have a pretty fair cross representation of people from all over Sicily, southern Italy, up to Naples, Ustica, Sardinia, and then of course Croatia and in Greece.
and that's interesting because I interviewed somebody a few months ago he's actually Italian, but he did a lot of papers on the migration to America of Italians. And one of the things that he kind of mentioned was that originally they tried, I guess, the Irish and Germans to do that, but they couldn't handle the heat. So they had to try to get, people who were used to the heat and the humidity to work
Uh,
in the South.
you're 100% correct, Bob, because if you read the document that was created by the Bureau of Immigration for the state of Louisiana, they talked about the climate. And the climate in New Orleans is consistent with that of southern Italy, particularly Sicily, in the summertime. The winters here in New Orleans are mild. The winters in Sicily are mild. It may freeze a little bit, but it'll stay cold. It snowed last year here in New Orleans, but it was the first time in 10 years. Uh, but uh, uh, but you're right. The climate had a lot to do with it. The Irish before the Civil War dug a major canal here in New Orleans called the New Basin Canal, and many of them died in the heat and malaria. In fact, it's now part of the expressway system. And then there's a Celtic cross in memorial of all the Irish who had died um, um, digging that canal. And you can imagine before the Civil War, they didn't have power tools. A lot of it was back-breaking uh, work in the hot sun. And it does get hot here. It does get hot here. So great sympathy for the Irish. And the Irish were treated poorly, just as the Italians were. In fact, the book outlines a little bit about it because the Irish police chief, David Hennessy, wasn't treated well, but that's what the book is about. And the Italians were blamed for his assassination.
Um, yeah, and I think people are familiar with that. On the surface, kind of that they know there was this tragedy with um, the lynching and all of that. But I don't think everybody knows the backstory behind it and how it bubbled up, you know?
Well, like I said, I start off with a book. Matter of fact, ironically, I started the book in Bissakino and then showed the immigration path from Sicily to New Orleans, and then what happened. The Italians didn't know what they were running into when they landed in the South, and they were coming in during a period of post Reconstruction. The scabs of the Civil War was still fresh. Um, New Orleans was not uh, destroyed during the Civil War. It surrendered in 1862 to the Union, and the United States government controlled the port of New Orleans. And as you know, that we hear everything a lot about today about tariffs. Tariffs was the primary revenue generator for the United States back then, and a lot of money was being generated in New Orleans through the tariffs. And then the government wanted to control New Orleans because of the tariff system and tax system. They were funding the Union Army and the United States Army. But a lot of people in New Orleans um, suffered economically because of that, and they remember that. Overlaying that statement, let me tell you that New Orleans has a very caste system of old people who think they're still in old Europe royalty. So they had a caste system that controlled all the business enterprises, particularly the cotton and sugarcane crops in New Orleans, and they wanted to control the docks. And after the Union Army pulled out in the 1870s, after Reconstruction, and gave Louisiana back control of the state and New Orleans back control of the city. But the people in New Orleans they lost a lot of money during the Civil War, and they wanted to recover it. But in comes the Italians, and a group of them worked hard to build businesses along the French Quarter. If you've been in New Orleans, it lines the Mississippi River, and the dock system. And part of the dock system was controlled by some Italian groups, as well as the stevedores who unload the boats, unload the ships. And that was the seminal cause of the friction between the ruling class and the immigrant class in New Orleans. And it's a sad story how they were treated, uh, very sad. And then it was tough to write, to be honest with you, Bob, part of the book, because I heard a lot about it growing up from my dad. My dad was born in 1912, and then he told me a lot about it and how the Italians were treated, how he was treated as a young boy in New Orleans by the white Anglo-Saxon uh, Protestant class, which we have had New Orleans. Although New Orleans considered itself a Catholic city, there was still a lot of prejudice against Catholics in New Orleans, particularly beginning with the Irish and the French. And then here comes the Italians with their religion. And so a lot of it was the prejudice. The prejudice was had its origins in their religion, as well as the foreign language that the Sicilians spoke, particularly Sicilian, because Sicily has 9 distinct dialects, and as well as speaking Italian. So it's a mishmash of dialects and words the various depends on what part of Sicily you came from. It depends on what dialect you spoke. You know, we have a large Contessa Antolina society here, which is, as you know, they go back to the Arabic people in Albania from the 16th century. And when the Muslims ran them out of that country and they landed in southern Italy. And you have the Ionic side, the Greek side of Sicily, Siracusa, uh, Messina, Taormina, that side. And of course, you have what you call the Italic northern Sicily, Palermo, uh, where my grandparents were from. So you had a mishmash of dialects in New Orleans, which didn't sit well with some people back then.
So how did the Italians, how did they get control of the docks so early?
Well, under Louisiana law, there's a thing called, well, Louisiana has the thing called the Napoleonic Code, which, which ironically goes back to Roman law, Justinian's code. Napoleon appropriated it and put his name on it, and hence we call it the Napoleonic Code. And under the Napoleonic Code, the riparian owners, or that is the land, the adjacent to any navigable waterway, is the riparian land, and that was owned by the state, technically owned by the state. That brought this out in the book a little bit. There's a little exegesis uh, on Napoleonic law. But what happened was the city took control after Reconstruction, and the state didn't wasn't that strong back then. New Orleans was a heavily populated area, even doing it 275, close to 300,000 people, even back then. So it's the largest city in the South, as a matter of fact. At that time. So the city took control of the docks and leased it out to a management company, and the management company sublet it to anybody who would help develop and pay rent. So a group of Italians um, uh, started a stevedore business and loading the docks, built the infrastructure along the waterfront, and that's how they control the commerce. A segment of the rig, not the whole docks, not the entire docks. The segment of the docks contiguous with the French Quarter and a little bit downriver from the French Quarter. So they controlled essentially the movement of cargo, the movement of stevedores, and in the book we meet um, three families who were prominent in the commerce of the river: the Machica family, Matranga family, and the Provenzanos. And the Machica, J.P. Machica, which is really a Maltese name, is probably it's pronounced Macheca, but everybody calls it Machica. Machica had the boats and the ships that would bring produce, or they called, use a 19th century term, comestibles, up from Central and South America and from Sicily, produce products. Footnote: New Orleans, the United States didn't know what a banana was until after the Civil War. I found that hilarious because bananas basically a staple in everybody's breakfast almost today. But before the Civil War, they didn't know what a banana was. But that's because weren't brought in from Central America. So J.P. Machica had the boats, Matranga and Provenzano had the stevedores. And then you had the nucleus of New Orleans' economic power was the cotton exchange. And that's something to remember. Everybody remembers the old saying, cotton is king. Well, it was. And the cotton exchange was basically populated by the elites of New Orleans, and they would make their money and try to recoup the losses during the Civil War, and try to build the cotton business, because New Orleans handled all the cotton traffic and sugarcane traffic up and down the Mississippi Valley. And we were in competition with cities like Mobile and Galveston. And Mobile and Galveston, you look at the map, are on the Gulf of America. And New Orleans is 94 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi River. We are not on the Gulf of Mexico, on the Gulf of America. So we had the competition was fierce. So when when a boat came in full of comestibles or perishables, who got the treatment? They had to load the boats and get the perishables off the ships. Cotton didn't rot, So we were in competition with the other two cities for exporting cotton to the major looms in Liverpool, England, and Le Havre, France. Those were the two biggest customers New Orleans had back then. I got into the weeds in this research. It took 6 years to write this book. So I got into the weeds of very granular level of the economy back then. And that's what, to answer your question, that's how it started. And it just grew and grew over the years. And coming 1888, 1890, it got critical because the J.P. Machika's company had more boats and more ships. Now we are operating under steam and sail, and so they will be able to move comestibles much quicker and get them to market much quicker. But again, cotton doesn't rot, and and produce does. That's why you look at, when I was a kid, I remember all the major produce companies were Italian owned, and still even today, you see some of the trucks servicing the various restaurants and in the French Quarter with Italian names emblazoned on the side of the trucks. So that's how they got control of it, and the city fathers at the time needed to get the control back, and eventually they did. And then the state took it over about 20 years later.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.co. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. So now, the lynchings of the Italians, was that something that it it, it just happened, or did it was it the end of something that had been building for years and years?
Well, let me go back to the probably the first World's Fair in the United States was known as the Cotton Centennial of 1884, which celebrated 100 years of Louisiana, even before it was a state. In 1784, we started trading cotton here. In 1784, Louisiana was under Spanish rule. And we started trading cotton with foreign countries. So we had a cotton centennial in 1884, and the director of security at that cotton centennial was David C. Hennessy, the chief, who eventually became the superintendent of police. There was a lot of scandal in that World's Fair or Cotton Centennial, and it appears that Hennessy knew a lot of the dark secrets of some of these families. Well, lo and behold, when the mayor a mayor was elected, his name was Joseph Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was elected in 1888, and to the consternation of many people, he appointed David Hennessy as a superintendent of police, because David Hennessy got a lot of plaudits nationally for securing the World's Fair, but the secrets weren't known. Even the New York Times wrote plaudits about how Hennessy did a great job securing the World's Fair. So Shakespeare appointed Hennessy, an Irish Catholic, what they used to term shanty Irish Catholic, who grew up in a mixed neighborhood. Ethnically, economically, it was poor. Now, ironically, if you're familiar with the geography of current New Orleans, it's approximately about 2 blocks away from the Louisiana Superdome now, where the Saints try to play football. I had to throw that in there. But
Oh, we got the Giants, so and the Jets. I think they have 3 wins between the two of them.
I have to laugh. You got to laugh. So that was Hennessy's neighborhood, and of course, we have a major, if you've been in New Orleans, we have a major main street, it's called Canal Street. And that was your meridian. That was your separation of the American sector from the European sector. European sector was the French Quarter, and the American sector was upriver. And Gerard Street is the street where Hennessy lived on. That was where the Irish, where most of the Irish lived in that area around where the Superdome is, and a little bit closer to the river. They appointed him chief of police, and he tried to reform the police department. The police department was highly political, highly corrupt, and he tried his best to do what he can. He was friends with the Provenzano's family and knew the Matrangas very well. The newspapers in New Orleans were wholly corrupt, and particularly the Daily Picayune, which is now known as the Times-Picayune. And every time an Italian was killed, they labeled it a mafia war. They didn't understand the etymology of the word mafia, so they just labeled it mafia. And hence the prejudice started to build and foment against the Italian population in New Orleans. And then eventually Hennessy, as the book points out, Hennessy was shot on October 15th, 1890. He died the next morning, October 16th. And then Mayor Shakespeare immediately ordered the arrest of every Italian that was walking the streets. They arrested over 270 Italians immediately within the first 48 hours of Hennessy's death. And it's all outlined in the book, and how they raided the French Quarter for Italian immigrants. And eventually what happened was they decided to indict 19 Italians for the murder of David Hennessy. Although every so-called witness said there was only 5 shooters, they indicted 19. They went to trial with 9. 6 were outright acquitted. 3 was a hung jury. The next day, they stormed the Paris prison and lynched 11, 6 of whom never went to trial. And then they had a grand jury investigation, and the grand jury was composed of members of the lynch mob, and they covered it up, and they didn't indict anyone, despite the fact that the leaders of the lynch mob were known as the Committee of 50, and their names were put in the newspaper proudly. So they knew who was involved in the lynchings of these Italians. And then several days later, the rest of the Italians were just let go.
So did they find out who actually did it and why?
Yeah, they knew who did it. I'm going to post something on my Facebook page. I got an excerpt from the Daily Picayune. It's written in 19th century legalese, and legalese is, even by today's standards, difficult to understand. To read your insurance policy. And they justified it saying there were so many people involved that we can't indict the whole city. That's basically what they said in a very legalistic way. But despite that, you look at the members of the grand jury, which their names were published in the newspaper, and the leader of the foreman of the grand jury was related to the guy who was in charge of the cotton exchange. And you can't make this stuff up. And so they decide not to indict anyone. Well, that caused a furor in Rome. The cables between Washington and Rome, and there was a furor when the news came out that 9 Italian citizens were lynched. The United States violated the mutual aid treaty, and Italy had the 4th largest navy at the time. After the Civil War, Bob, we demilitarized. You have to understand the zeitgeist of the time. We had no enemies. America had no enemies. So we demilitarized after the Civil War, and but Italy had the 4th largest navy in the world and threatened to blockade the mouth of the Mississippi River, essentially strangling the tariff revenue generation of New Orleans and the United States. So that's how we got Benjamin Harrison, the president at the time, because we were in violation of the treaty. The United States was in violation of the treaty to protect foreign citizens in our country. We paid the reparations to the families, and then Benjamin Harrison, to further assuage the Italian people here domestically and in Rome, um, decided to make October 12, 1892, Columbus Day, to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America, actually the Western Hemisphere. And that's how we got Columbus Day, because of these lynchings in New Orleans. And all this furor about Indigenous People Day replacing Columbus Day, people don't understand how we got Columbus Day. It wasn't because of Columbus's discovery of America, primarily. It was because of the lynchings in New Orleans. So anytime someone says they hate Columbus Day or anti-Columbus Day, just ask them, are you pro-lynching? And they'll look at you quizzically and say, what do you mean I'm pro-lynching? And tell them the story how we got Columbus Day as a federal holiday. Later, it was codified into law. First, it was Harrison's proclamation, then it was eventually codified into law. And that's how
Did
we
they
got.
did they pick Columbus because everybody knew of him anyway? I mean, there were, tons and tons of prominent Italians over
That's a good question. There
centuries.
were five Italian names proposed.
Ah, okay, I didn't know that.
Including Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Bernini, I think was one. I forget the other one, and Columbus. No one could have a consensus, not surprisingly. So Harrison said, wait a minute, wait. We're coming up on October 12, 1892, 400th anniversary of discovery of the Americas, plural. I'm going to pick. Harrison picked Columbus.
Ah,
And that assuaged Italy. That assuaged the local Italian population in the Northeast, where you are, and that's how we got the holiday. And that's why you got a lot of Columbus statues in the Northeast, somewhere in the Midwest, but you don't have one in New Orleans because they suppressed the truth. Even today, there's some people didn't want me to write this book.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Even today, there's a small street in New Orleans called Columbus Street, but that's it.
Hmm.
No Columbus statues, no commemoration of Columbus. In fact, the city of New Orleans removed Columbus Day from its municipal calendar. And I want to mention a fellow's name, an attorney friend of mine in New York, Mike Santo. Mike Santo led the charge to get the city of New Orleans to apologize for their participation in the lynchings. And on April 12th, 2019, the mayor of New Orleans formally apologized for the lynchings, for the city's participation in the lynchings. But Mike and I, research in his book, I find out that the state of Louisiana had a strong hand in the lynchings too, because the governor back then could have stopped it, but he didn't. He refused to. So the state of Louisiana owes the Italian Americans of this country an apology as well. We're trying to get the governor even today to see that, but we haven't got that, been successful yet.
That's so interesting. I just recently, and I did a little YouTube thing on it. I always thought Cincinnati was named after the Indians, but it wasn't. It was named after Cincinnatus, a Roman general. Oh no, I had no idea.
And you got Columbus, Ohio, just up the road.
There's Columbus everywhere, South Carolina and the District of Columbia and all of that. But I don't think I honestly think, I mean, we're old guys now. I don't think these kids, I don't think they even know why these places are named, Columbus, Ohio, or even maybe who Columbus even is. Who knows?
No, kids, and that's why I wrote the book. It's a good history book. It's also a good story, I believe. uh, kids today are not taught history.
Or
We
geography either.
oh yeah, absolutely, my Bob. Uh, if we lose our history, we lose our sovereignty, just like we lose our borders.
Mhm.
Our history is part of our sovereignty. And if we lose our history, and we're losing it, I fear, um, we could definitely just be a blob on a map, not a nation anymore, not a sovereign nation at least. History should be taught, uh, uh, vigorously taught in our schools by people who know history. And you got a lot of teachers who think they know history, but they don't. You got a lot of professors at our universities who've got PhDs in history, but what does that mean? And so we lamentably, I think we're losing an entire generation, maybe two, because of our educational system. But that's a different. I'm diverting. I'm sorry.
No,
Uh,
no, that's okay. I know exactly what you mean. So what did anything change after the lynchings within New Orleans itself towards the Italians? Did fundamentally
well,
did the attitude
ironic.
change?
Let me say after the lynchings, a few days later on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, the district attorney dismissed the charges on the remaining Italian defendants. That shows you how strong his case was. Um, um, then that was March. In April of 1892, the city of New Orleans passed an ordinance creating the Louisiana Construction and Improvement Company, which took over all of the riparian structures along the Mississippi River for 3.5 miles, and they destroyed all the Italian structures, and the city took over the commerce along the river until the state moved in and eventually took it over. But that was right after, and the person they put in charge of the Louisiana Construction Improvement Company was the campaign manager of the mayor, Joseph Shakespeare, and his name is J.D. Houston. He plays a prominent role in this book. And if you go back to 1977, a doctor who taught on Long Island, Dr. Richard Gambino, wrote a book called Vendetta. A very good book, short book. You can read it in a day. But HBO made a movie of it in 1997. But Dr. Gambino was onto something. I don't think he realized how close he was to the truth. But he made the prominent villain. That's a good word, villain, of the story, J.D. Houston. And the movie portrayed J.D. Houston as the villain, and Christopher Walken played that character in the movie. Now, J.D. Houston is a very interesting guy. He had a reputation of being not only Shakespeare's campaign manager, but he was also a gunfighter, and he killed several men in gunfights in New Orleans. They talk about the Old West. New Orleans was like the Old West. Um, In fact, Hennessy's father was killed by a fellow by the name Arthur Guerin, and Houston killed Arthur Guerin in a different gunfight. So Hennessy's father, when the Union occupation started, worked for General Benjamin Butler, who was the uh, general who controlled New Orleans, the Union Army. Hennessy's father joined the Union Army, which didn't sit well with the citizens of New Orleans, and they remembered that Hennessy name years later. Uh, Long knives have long memories. Um, I don't know if I answered your question. I go
Yeah,
on.
yeah, no, no, you did. You did. I mean, basically, it didn't get any better.
No, no,
Okay.
no, no. In fact, nationally, it didn't get better. In 1924, Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts, because he had an Italian population in the north end of Massachusetts, particularly around Hanover Street, if you're familiar with Boston.
Mhm.
He, in the background, created what is known as the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, which restricted Italian population to 5,000 people a year. And they went out and actively recruited more Northern Europeans, particularly German, English, and back then even Irish. Things changed for the Irish and Northern Europeans to the disadvantage of Italians. In 1924, Calvin Coolidge signed a bill, but they said Calvin Coolidge would sign anything he put in front of him. But although he was a Republican, uh, Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. Was behind the bill, and that's called the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, the Immigration Restriction Act, and people can research that and read the history of that. So all the way up to 1924, Bob, it was bad. My dad grew up in the stories he told me. Italian kids would play with the black kids in New Orleans, and the cops. And I was a New Orleans policeman at one time in the '70s, and my dad didn't like that too much. But um, he they would run the kids off the corner, make them go inside, even in sweltering summers before air conditioning. So it was tough for being black, being Italian. Even the Jewish kids were picked on a little bit in this neighborhood around the mid city in New Orleans, where Italians and blacks and Jews all got together and lived cheek to jowl with one another, and it just something that the prejudice was so endemic at that time. So it was a tough time for these guys. So to answer your question, I think things were bad for the Italian community all the way up to World War II. It
Well,
didn't.
and even that was still in the effect afterwards because my uncle, my mother's oldest brother, he had stayed. He was a baby, 2 or 3 years old when my grandparents came here, and they left him behind with his grandparents, and he had to wait in Canada for 4 years to come to America, even though he had four brothers who fought in the war for America.
My
He
dad was
he,
wounded in Normandy.
he still had to wait in Canada for close to
Yeah,
5 years, 4 or 5 years with his family.
my dad was in the 29th Infantry Division and was wounded landed in Omaha Beach, and was eventually wounded in Normandy, in St. Lo, France, which is about 20 miles north of or south of Omaha Beach. I just read just the other day that 10% of the American fighting force in World War II, both in Pacific Theater and the Atlantic Theater, were Italian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I walked the cemetery in Normandy, in Colleville-sur-Mer. That's where the major cemetery is in France. There's a lot of Italian American names on those white crosses that you cannot forget. And any American who wants to be reminded of their American origins and their freedoms should go to Normandy and walk that cemetery. It'll hit you right in the gut. It hits
Well,
you up.
that's why Roosevelt had to do away with the Italians on the enemies list, right? He needed us to fight. He needed us.
Well, a lot of people don't know that Italians were interred like the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
You go back there was a major internment camp in Missoula, Montana, and not too many people when you hear about internment camps, you think about the Japanese being interred. But you dig deep, and I dug a little deep into it. Even Joe DiMaggio's father lost his fishing boat
Yes.
in San Francisco.
Yep.
Because 3 American cities at that time had Italian American mayors: San Francisco, New York, and New Orleans. And so it was. My grandmother, rest her soul, had to wear a badge on her, a brooch or something on her a little dress when she went out to market, and to say that she was a citizen of a hostile nation, Italy. She couldn't.
I didn't know that. I have the registration cards from my mother's parents. I have I have copies of the cards. My cousin or my aunt, somebody saved them. It has their picture on it and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah. It's really really incredible. So before we go, where can people find the book?
I say that again.
Where can people find the book?
Well,
Uh,
my publisher's Historium Press, or Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. They can order it from there. I have several book signings coming up. Another couple of podcasts coming up in your region, the Northeast, in New York. Mike Santo, like I said, the attorney from Long Island, is leading the charge on that too. He's read the book. He understands the history behind the lynchings and the motives thereof, and he's on board 100%. So he's trying to arrange some speaking engagements in New York, and I'm willing to do that. Travel to New York because this is a personal thing. Because I grew up with it. I heard about it. With a name like mine, um, uh, I kind of stuck out in some neighborhoods until I went to high school. My high school was half Italian, so all that prejudice kind of went away
mm.
when I went to a Catholic high school, and most of the boys, it's a boys' high school, and you dare not try to prejudice an Italian kid in that high school back then. Even the brothers of the Sacred Heart wouldn't tolerate it. But they knew the history of New Orleans, and this is it's an untold story. But a whole cobblestones opens a lot of people's minds to the past, and I still think there's blatant prejudices extent even today here in New Orleans and in other parts of the United States. And that's why you got so many Italian American civil rights groups very active in your part of the country. We have none here. We have clubs and that sort of thing, but you actually have a civil rights organization um, in New York City, which is very active and very vigorous. And thank God they're there to protect our heritage. Um, so to answer your question, your book can be bought at Amazon. You can go on Amazon uh, or Historium Press and buy it there. It's broken up it's a long book. Some people are intimidated by it's 590 pages. Um, it's broken up into 6 parts. Don't be intimidated by its size. And like I say, it took over 6 years to research and write. And I can talk about it all day long as my voice holds up.
Sure, I'm sure. Well, thanks again, Sal. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I hope your listeners uh, will take time to study the situation. Never let the Columbus Day slip by. I know that one of the candidates for mayor in New York wants to do away with Columbus Day and take that. Oh, that's a footnote. The reason why you have the Columbus Circle in Manhattan is because of these lynchings.
Really? Yeah.
So you people know that when you go to Columbus Circle in Manhattan, that that monument there was put there because of these lynchings here in New Orleans. And so I want to get that across. Which hope that to me, Columbus Day symbolizes Italian civil rights, and I think that's what a lot of us, and particularly our fathers and grandfathers, grandparents, suffered when they first came here. They didn't know what they were walking into when they came to America.
Yeah, that's for sure. Don't go away. I'm just going to stop the recording. So.